To most people, Lake Iliamna looks like Alaska's largest and calmest lake, but those who live near it know that it is anything but calm. Beneath its surface, shadows move where no one expects them. Fishing nets disappear. Boats return with deep scars cut into their sides. For centuries, people have whispered about something enormous that lives in the water. Many call it Alaska's version of Jaws, only this creature is not just a movie monster. They believe it is real, and far bigger than most of us could imagine. Lake Iliamna is not an ordinary lake. It is so vast that it looks more like an inland sea than a body of fresh water. It stretches nearly 80 miles long and 25 miles wide. To put that into perspective, you could drop the entire city of Los Angeles inside its waters and still have space left over. But the size of the lake is not what makes it frightening. What makes it terrifying are the secrets that seem to hide deep below the surface. The lake sits in one of the wildest and most isolated parts of Alaska. There are no highways that lead to it and no major towns built around its shores. Most people will never come close to standing on its banks. That isolation gives it a sense of mystery, allowing strange things to exist for centuries without being discovered. Adding to the mystery is the fact that the lake is not completely cut off from the sea. A long river called the Kvichak flows out of Lake Iliamna all the way to Bristol Bay and then to the Bering Sea. This connection makes it possible for ocean creatures to enter the lake, adapt to fresh water, and then disappear into the depths. It has already happened with smaller animals. Seals have been seen swimming in the lake, and even beluga whales have been spotted playing in its waters miles inland. If seals and whales can survive in this freshwater giant, many wonder if something much larger and more dangerous could also be hiding there. The structure of the lake makes hiding even easier. On the surface it looks calm, but below it is divided into layers. Warm water floats on top, while colder and heavier water lies far below. This divide, called a thermocline, is invisible to the human eye but creates the perfect hiding place. Below the thermocline, sonar becomes weaker, light disappears almost completely, and visibility drops to nearly nothing. A massive animal could swim just 30 feet beneath your boat, and you would never notice it. Fishermen often say the lake swallows anything that falls into it. With depths plunging more than 1,000 feet, roughly the height of the Empire State Building turned upside down, it is easy to imagine something the size of a bus rising out of that darkness and brushing silently against the bottom of your boat. Because of these mysteries, locals call Lake Iliamna the lake that swallows secrets. Over the decades, pilots flying over its surface have reported seeing enormous shadows gliding below. These shapes were too big to be normal fish, too slow to be whales, and too strange to explain away. People began asking, what kind of creature could live in a place like this, hidden from the world, powerful enough to terrify those who know the lake best? Long before pilots and cameras tried to capture proof, the people who lived near the lake had already told stories about creatures demanding respect. These stories were not told for entertainment but for survival. The Tlingit people spoke of a great animal called gunakadite, said to rise out of the water with such strength that it could flip canoes and drag men into the depths. Elders warned that when the water grew dark or when ripples appeared without wind, it was time to leave immediately. Those who ignored these warnings often never returned. Farther west, the Aleut people told stories of creatures they called jignuk. They described them as hunters that moved together in groups, circling boats before striking from below. Fishermen were warned never to travel alone and to always watch for sudden changes in the lake's surface. Aleut songs and oral histories described animals so powerful that they could smash wooden vessels apart. The message was clear: Lake Iliamna could give life through its salmon runs, but it could also take life in an instant. These warnings were passed down in more than just words. Totem carvings showed long bodies with sharp fins. Ceremonial songs imitated the movements of predators swimming beneath the water. Each story carried knowledge that was meant to protect people. They acted like an early record of observation, built from centuries of direct experience, and carried forward as carefully as any written science. When Russian fur traders arrived in the 1700s, they came in search of valuable sea otter pelts. But they soon began recording their own disturbing encounters. Some wrote of boats being struck by unseen forces, of men pulled suddenly from the water, their bodies never recovered. At first, the traders dismissed the native legends as superstition, but as more accidents were recorded, they began to take the warnings seriously. Imagine one of those traders guiding his wooden boat across what seemed like a calm lake, the evening sun low on the horizon. Suddenly a shadow passes underneath, so large it blocks out the light. The hull shudders as something scrapes against it. In seconds, the water erupts, the boat flips, and the men are left gasping in the icy water. The few who survived such encounters never doubted the stories again. What is most striking is how closely these old legends resemble the reports told today. Both speak of creatures with bodies that shine like metal under the sun, moving in groups, attacking boats, and giving little chance of escape. These details have lasted through centuries, across different languages and cultures, yet always connected by the same lake. Looking back now, it seems possible that the stories were not just myths, but some of the earliest records of strange encounters at Lake Iliamna. The Tlingit and Aleut people may not have had sonar or modern science, but they had generations of observation, and they left behind a map of warnings that still matches what witnesses continue to describe. By the summer of 1942, the mystery of Lake Iliamna had already spanned centuries, but that year a man named Babe Allsworth would add one of the most unforgettable accounts. He was a bush pilot, someone who spent his life flying over Alaska's wilderness. He knew every mountain ridge, every river, and every mile of Lake Iliamna. Sitting beside him that day was Bill Hammersley, a government wildlife agent. What the two men were about to see from their small plane would deepen the mystery forever. What was supposed to be a routine flight over Lake Iliamna in the summer of 1942 became one of the most famous encounters in Alaskan history. Pilot Babe Allsworth and government wildlife agent Bill Hammersley expected nothing unusual as they crossed the long stretch of water. But then Allsworth noticed shapes below the surface. At first he assumed they were drifting logs, common in Alaskan lakes. Then the logs moved. They weren't drifting at all. They were alive. Hammersley leaned in close to the window, staring at the water with disbelief. Together, the two men counted not just one or two, but more than a dozen massive creatures gliding beneath them. Allsworth later described the animals as metallic-looking, their backs flashing in the sunlight as if they were made of polished steel. Each appeared to be nearly as long as the wingspan of his plane. Even more unsettling was how they moved. They were not scattered randomly like fish, but swam in a loose formation, coordinated and purposeful, almost like a patrol. Allsworth had flown over countless lakes and rivers in his career, but nothing compared to this sight. When the plane landed, the men could not keep the story to themselves. Allsworth was already familiar with the old indigenous tales and local stories, but now he had seen something with his own eyes. Hammersley, who had a reputation for level-headed government reports, confirmed every detail. Their combined credibility gave the encounter a weight that folklore alone had never carried. Soon their account spread far beyond Iliamna's remote villages. The story reached the ears of Tom Slick, a wealthy Texas oilman with an unusual hobby. He poured money into the search for undiscovered animals. When he heard about the 1942 sighting, Lake Iliamna quickly became one of his obsessions. He funded expeditions, interviewed witnesses, and studied the lake's geography. On one occasion, a steel fishing hook the size of a man's arm was pulled from the water completely bent out of shape, as if something unimaginably strong had fought against it from below. The Allsworth-Hammersley sighting marked a turning point. Until then, stories of lake monsters were often dismissed as myths or exaggerations. But this was different. A respected pilot and a government official had given detailed, matching testimony. Soon other pilots began to step forward with their own sightings, describing creatures of similar size and movement. What made the 1942 report so difficult to dismiss was the scale of it. One shadow could be written off as an illusion,